See, if you are going to learn Spring every day, it will take a minimum of 2 to 3 weeks for understanding Spring. If you are very good in Java, you can learn Spring. If you are going to dedicate 4 hours, then you can learn Spring in 2 weeks. From the basics to in-depth. Spring, Spring Boot, all put together, I'm just telling. Okay, fine. Now guys, let us get started. This is the continuation of last week's webinar. In the last week's webinar, we understood what is Spring, what is dependency injection, what is the difference between Spring and Spring Boot. Actually, you can create applications, that is console-based applications, that is standalone applications using Spring framework. Spring Boot is just a tool which is going to make our work very easy. Before jumping into Spring Boot, you should understand how a basic Spring application works like. So for that, we will be starting with Maven only. First, before jumping into any application, we need to understand what is dependency injection. Dependency injection already we have learned in the previous session. I will just give an intro about the dependency injection part. The two types of dependency injection that is supported by Spring framework. Then we will directly jump into the application. So we will learn how to create a simple Spring application using Maven. I am not using Spring Boot. In the upcoming videos, we will learn that. So now we will do this, and then we will also understand the concept of auto wiring. What is the meaning of auto wiring? Why we need to use auto wiring? Okay, fine. Now let us get started. So in the previous week, we have learned about dependency injection. Okay. So first is, even before going into dependency injection, you need to understand about IOC container. What is IOC container? IOC container means inversion of control container. So this container is responsible for injecting the dependencies. Say for example, already we have learned about dependency injection. What is dependency injection? Dependency injection is a concept in which the dependencies needed for a class will be injected automatically. Say, for example, I am having two classes, employee and address class. Employee has addresses instance variable. Okay, so this is my employee class. And this is my address class. Employee also has few other instance variables like name, employee ID, department. All these are primitive types. What about address? Address by itself is a class. This type of combination is called as association. Okay, if a class has another class as dependency, this is called as association. Now here I am having address class. In address class, I am having city, state, zip code and all that. As a Java developer, if you are working in Java, if you want to create an employee object, how do you create an employee object? Explicitly, you need to write it as employee is equal to new employee. While creating the employee object itself in the constructor, you can pass the address object. That is, explicitly, you need to create the address object. Address is equal to new address by passing city and state, Karnataka and Bangalore. Then in the employee constructor, I need to pass the address object. Now, this is one way. What is the other one? I don't want to, I don't have a parameterized constructor. In that scenario, you can create it as employee1 is equal to new employee, then you will have to call the setter method. Employee1 dot set the address by passing the address. So guys, if you are working in an application, a Java application, as a Java developer, it is your duty that you need to perform this operation. But if you are going to use a framework like Spring, it is reducing this work. It uses the concept of dependency injection. If a class has a dependency of another class, whatever dependencies are needed, it will be automatically injected. Okay, so in case of employee depends on address. Address will be injected. Guys, please mute your mic. address will be injected into employee object automatically. How actually it is going to inject? Just like how you have used a setter method or a constructor to add the dependencies. Here what we are doing, we are explicitly adding address into employee using the setter method or using the constructor. But in case of Spring, Spring will take care of it. Who is responsible for doing this? That is called as the IOC container, inversion of control container. This container is responsible for doing this operations. Okay, so what and all you need to know about this? First is when you talk about the IOC container, this I have created an application. In my application, I am having Java classes, just like what we have seen. Guys, whatever I am telling now, this employee address, this is just for your basic understanding. In a real-time scenario, you will be having different layers, like a service layer, a repository layer, a database layer. The service layer will depend on repository. Repository will depend on database. Whatever dependencies are there, it will be injected. So in the upcoming sessions, we will be talking about that. Now, I have in my application, I am having Pojos. Now, this is my IOC container, inversion of control container. Inversion of control container. Okay. Now, in case of Spring framework, when you are giving all your classes to the IOC container, the IOC container is responsible for creating the objects. In our case, we are having employee and address. Okay, I'm having employee and address. So the IOC container has to create the employee object and address object. But how it will know that it has to create these objects? So for that, the IOC container uses something called as configuration metadata. Now, suppose say you are buying a mic or you are buying a web camera. How do you assemble it? You don't know how to assemble it. But what will be there? There will be an instruction manual saying that you attach this clamp to this particular place. You attach this screw in this particular area. All the instructions will come, right? Similar to that, the IOC container has to create objects for your application. How does it know what are all the classes available? For which classes it has to create objects? Which class depends on which class? All these informations are not available. So the IOC container will go and read the configuration metadata. As a developer, you will be giving these details, the configuration metadata. In which format it will be? Earlier, people were using XML. It can be in the form of XML, or it can be in the form of annotation, or it can be in the form of Java-based configuration. My dear guys, if you are doing a normal Java application, it is all you are doing it by yourself. Okay. Suppose if you want to do some cooking, if you are doing it from the scratch, you are doing it by yourself. But if you are trying a package, see wherein like what you have to do, you have to read the instructions and follow the instructions. Only based on the instructions you need to do the cooking. Similarly, if you are going to assemble something all by yourself, then it is your own product. But if you are buying an item, just like this mic, you are buying an item from outside and you want to assemble it, you cannot do it by yourself. You have to read the instruction manual. Based on the instruction manual, you will assemble your mic. Similarly, in case of Spring framework, it is having IOC container. You have created multiple classes in your application. You will never create an object of your class in case of Spring. Who is responsible for creating the objects? The IOC container. How does it know that it has to create an object? The IOC container will read this manual. What is the manual? The configuration metadata. It can be in the form of XML or annotations or Java-based configurations. Okay, so, okay, fine. Now it is reading all this configuration metadata and it is creating the objects. So when it is creating the objects, it has to create employee object. It understands that employee object depends on address. So what first it will do? It will create the address object, then it will create the employee object. Guys, please mute your mics. It will create the address object, then it will create the employee object. While creating the employee object, it will inject the address into employee. I hope you all can understand. First, I have part A, I have part B. A has dependency on B. So what I have to do first? I have to create B first and then attach B to A. That is how the IOC container will do. So whatever objects created by the IOC container, they are not called as Java objects. They are called as Spring Beans. Okay, all these are called as Spring Beans. The Java objects created, assembled and managed by the IOC container are called as Spring Beans. In your application, you will never use new keyword in case of Spring because all the objects has to be created by the IOC container. But of course, I need to create the IOC container first, no? So for creating the IOC container, let us learn what is an IOC container, what are the two types. Okay, some question has come. Any questions, guys? Sorry, XML means extensible markup language. So that is what that we will not be using it. Usually in case of what is it? In case of Spring, we will be working with annotations. Now let me explain the next part. So we were talking about the IOC container, what it does. In case of Spring, IOC means inversion of control. Inversion of control means the control is reversed. Instead of you creating the object, the framework is going to create the object. Okay. So what are the interfaces that are whichever is acting as IOC container? There are two things. One is Bean Factory. Bean Factory is an interface. Okay. The other one is application context. Okay. Why do we use annotations? So actually, earlier people were working with XML. When people were working with XML, XML is verbose. It is huge. Just for creating one simple object, I have to write so many number of lines of code. So instead of that, they started giving annotations. Annotations is for the compiler to understand during the runtime or the compile time when it has to be converted. So there are few annotations that we will learn now. So in case of IOC container, what are the two annotations that are, what are the two IOC containers? The first one is Bean Factory, the top level interface, below which you are having application context. Application context. Bean Factory is the top level interface. Application context is a sub interface. So which one has the highest priority? Application context. It has got more functionalities. So as a developer, you will be creating the application context. While creating the, guys, remember, I told you we are working with the basic Spring. We are going to use Maven. So we need to create the IOC container. We create the IOC container and we will pass the package name where exactly the classes are available. So I will explain you while doing the program. So we will create the IOC container. I will give the package name, something like com.spring. So what the IOC container will do, it will enter into this particular package and it will see what are all the classes you have created. Suppose I have created class A, B, C, D. And how the IOC container will know that it has to create object of A, B, C, and D. So for that, these classes should be annotated with @component annotation. I hope you all can understand @component annotation. This is the first annotation that we are learning. If I want an object to be created by the IOC container, I need to use @component annotation. Getting it? Okay. Now let us just go through the slide little bit faster and then we will do the program. Okay. I will explain it again. Let us first go through this. So we are just going to understand what is dependency injection. I already told you dependency injection. There are two types of dependency injection: constructor based and setter based dependency injection. Right. The dependencies are injected by calling the setter methods. In case of constructor based, the dependencies are injected by calling the constructor. Okay, just a second. I will put the wrong. Repeat it. Okay. So now I will just talk about the IOC container. Yeah, here. Let us just quickly go through it and we jump into the program. What is IOC? Inversion of control. So just whatever I have told, it is given over here. I am having two classes. So why if the classes are, if you are going to create the object and inject it, then it is called as tight coupling. Already we have learned Spring supports to create applications which are loosely coupled. How it is achieved? Spring is responsible for creating the objects for you. Okay. Now, what are the two IOC containers? One is Bean Factory. The second one is application context. Application context is the sub-interface of Bean Factory. Bean Factory is a basic one. It has got less functionalities. Application context is the advanced one, which is having more functionalities. And what it will do? It will instantiate, that is create objects. Configure means if one class is dependent on another class, the dependencies will be injected and then it will be assembled. Okay, so how it will know what are the objects that has to be created? For that, it will be using configuration metadata. There are different, what is application context? It is an interface. I cannot use an interface. I need an implementation class. So the class that we are going to work with is annotation config application context. So this particular class will go in search of all the classes that are annotated with add component. Okay. Now, this we have seen. What is IOC container? Your application context. The application, you have created so many classes. The configuration metadata can be XML, annotations, or Java based. My dear guys, Spring is not going to write any code for you. It is just going to create all the objects that are needed for your application. As I told you, if you want to learn Spring, you should be good in Java. You will be writing only Java code in your Spring. Okay. But the work is made little bit more easier. That's all. So this is how it looks like. Now next, what is a bean? A Spring bean is nothing but a Java object instantiated by the IOC container. Whatever objects it is going to create. You are not supposed to say it as a Java object. You need to call it as a Spring bean. The bean can be a normal class which is annotated with that component. If you are creating a service layer, you will be using @service annotation. If you are working with a database repository, you will be using @repository annotation. There are many different types of annotation. We will go step by step. Okay. Now, so how do you create it? Just have a look. Application context. Context is equal to new annotation config application context. You pass the package name. When you pass the package name, what it will do is the IOC container will enter into the package. It will go and search for all the classes that are annotated with add component. If you have created a class, if you have not added add component annotation, it will not create an object for you. Only if you have added add component annotation, it will create an object for that particular class. Now, what will be the object name? Whatever class name you are having, the same thing in lowercase or camel case will be your class name, your object name. In my case, if I am having employee, what will be the object name? Employee in lowercase. If I am having my class name as student details, then student, S lowercase, D uppercase, that will be the object name. Okay, let us see an example. So this is configuration metadata. This is what we used earlier, XML based configuration. Now people are not using it. The next one is annotation based configuration. So what is the annotation? Add component annotation. What is the name of the bean? The bean name is student in lowercase. Yes, student in lowercase. Now, do not bother about this. This we will, going forward, we will learn about it. Okay. Next. There is the third one, Java-based configuration. Do not confuse with this. This is used only when you are going to work with inbuilt classes. Okay. How do you work with an application? I have created all the classes. Now, what is the next step? I need to create the IOC container. I need to create the IOC container and then create an object and use it. That's all. Now, let us see how this can be done. Instead of seeing through the PPT, we will do the program. Okay, now guys, I have opened Eclipse. We are not starting with Spring tool soon. With basic Eclipse itself, you can create a Spring application. I will be creating it as a Maven project. I will add the dependencies. So what are the steps I will tell you? So I want to create a simple Spring project. Guys, please mute your mics. So for creating a simple Spring project, we are starting with the basic one. So first step is you create a Maven project. Then next is in pom.xml, you need to add the dependency that is relevant to Spring. That is the second step. Then the third one is like I need to create classes for my application, right? So in our case, let us create an employee class. Then we will add an address class. Okay. Then the fourth step is I need to create a main class, which is having public static void main. So in this class, you will create the IOC container. IOC container means what? The application context. You will be creating an instance of application context. The moment you run that particular line, automatically it will go to those packages. It will create objects for all the classes. Only when you call context.getBean, it will return it. Suppose say you are going for a function, they are keeping everything ready even before you go for the function. So that is how application context will work in. So everything will be kept ready. The moment you ask for a particular bean, it will give the bean to you. So there is a difference between bean factory and application context. Application context will yearly load the beans. Even before you ask, it will give the beans. So we will see this as a program. What is Maven? Maven is a build tool. It is a project management tool. With the help of Maven only, we can create the application. Okay, what is the purpose of it? See, suppose say I am creating a Java application. Now I want to work with the database. I want to integrate my application with the database. So what do I need? I need my MySQL driver. So what should I do? I have to add it to the build path, or I have to go to the browser, the jar file, download it and add it to my application. Similarly, if I want to work with Spring, guys, you won't believe, I started with creating it as a normal Java application. What you guys are seeing is Spring Boot. That is the way to advanced level. When we started, we created as a normal Java application. We go to the browser, we search for Spring jars, we download it to our system, and then we add it to our application. That is way too difficult. Now I'm giving the application to you. What happens if you are using the application? All those jar files will be missing. Because actually it is not added at all, because again you have to download it in your system and you need to add it. So they moved on to Maven. Maven is a project management tool. It means that you just go and tell whatever dependencies you have. You go and add it in pom.xml. Automatically it will pick and choose the dependencies. Okay, fine. Now let us get started. First step is I need to create a Maven project. From here you can select or go to File, New, Maven project. Okay. Select Create a simple project. Click Next. So there is group ID and artifact ID. What is group ID? Group ID is the package name. If you are converting your application into a jar file and deploying it into Maven repository itself, in which package it will be available? It will be available in group ID only. I don't want to confuse it with this now. So let us just create the group ID as com.example. The next one is artifact ID. Artifact ID is nothing but your project name. So let me give the project name as Spring Basic. What about the packaging? The packaging is jar. Click Next and click Finish. Now the application is created. Let me open pom.xml. Okay, this is pom.xml. And change the type. Now, in this pom.xml, we need to add Spring dependency. So for that, first go to the browser. In the browser, search for Spring Context Maven. Now here you have got the Maven repository. From the Maven repository, you need to pick and choose the dependency. Select this org.spring framework. Now we need to select it. Guys, you can notice the latest version has come. Always, whenever you are selecting a dependency, always looking for the dependency that is being used very often. So now we will go in for 6. This one, 6.0.11. Click on this. In the bottom, you will be seeing the dependency, the group ID, artifact ID, version within the dependency tag. Just keep the cursor here, automatically it will be copied. Now come back to your application. In the application, you need to add something called as dependencies. Dependencies, because it's not one single dependency you are going to add. Going forward, if you're working with a database, if you're creating a web application, you need to add more dependencies, right? So for that, within the dependencies, you need to add the dependency that you have. I have copied it, so I have added it here. Shift Control F. Okay. Now, the moment I save, automatically, if you notice, I have got Maven dependencies. Let me open it. See, what are all the dependencies? Already we have learned Spring has got a set of modules with the help of which it is making enterprise application development easier. This time we are doing a simple standalone application. It's not a REST API, it's not a web application. It is a very basic standalone application. For that, what are the modules that you need? Context, AOP, Beans, core module. So here, I'll show you the modules. See here, you can just have a look. Context, Beans, core, AOP. These are the basic modules that are needed for working with the simple, even for a simple Spring application. It is automatically added to your application. The moment you add dependency. Okay, fine. Now, next is select SRC main Java, right click, new class. Let me give the package name com.shristi.training or setter. We are going to work with setter-based dependency injection, employee. Okay. Now, in this employee class, guys, for this alone and all, they will not use, what is that? They are not going to add all these, whatever we are learning. Going forward, in a bigger applications, you will learn that. But first, we need to understand the concept. So first, let me add private string employee name, private int employee ID. And private string department. That's it. Again, as usual, you need to create getter setter methods and toString. So go to source, generate getter setters, select all, enter. Generate. And go to source, generate toString. Generate. What is the purpose of toString? If you are trying to print the employee object, it will give all the details. This toString method will be called automatically. Okay, fine. Now, under Maven dependencies we have added, we have created an employee class. Now, I want the object to be created for this class. Spring has to create an object for this class. So what should I do? I need to annotate it with add component annotation. Okay. Now, the next step is we need to create the main class. So that's what we have seen, right? Create Maven project. In pom.xml, add the dependencies. We have just started with the employee class. Then we have used the main method within which we need to create the IOC container. Now let us just go back here. Now select your package, right click, new class. Let me give the class name as demo. A demo center. I need public static void main and click finish. So what is the first step? You need to create the IOC container. My dear guys, if you are working with a Spring Boot application, you don't have to create the IOC container. Automatically, it will be created by Spring Boot. If you are using a Spring Boot application, you don't have to go and add the dependency in pom.xml explicitly. Like what you are doing, you are just going to the browser, searching for it, copying it and adding it. But if you are using Spring Boot, you can just go and select, just like how you select in a delivery app. Whatever you want, you pick and choose and click. Add to cart, automatically it will be added, right? Similarly, if you are working with Spring Boot, you select the dependencies add it, automatically it will be added. But in case of Spring, explicitly you need to add it. That is what is important. Okay. Now, what is the purpose of getter setter methods? If I want to set the values, I need to use getter setter methods. And see, in the employee class, whatever variables I am using, it is private. It means you cannot access it outside the class. Only using public methods, you can access it. For that, we are using getter setter methods. Okay, first is create the IOC container. If you don't use, what is the purpose of add component? Spring framework can understand only these annotations. If you do not use this annotation, Spring framework will not create an object for that particular class. That is why we are using add component. Okay, so this is I need to create the IOC container. So what is that? Application context. This is the interface. Application context. Context is equal to new annotation based application context. Annotation config application context. What is the meaning of it? I am telling the application context, go and see the annotations that I have added for the class. So here, within which you need to specify the package name. What is our package? com.shristi.setter. It is enough you give com or com.shristi, or if you want to be very choosy about the package, you give the package name, full package name. So here I have given com.shristi. So the moment you create the IOC container, it will go through all the package and create the objects. Whatever objects are needed. The objects are nothing but Spring beans. You are not supposed to say it as objects. Actually, they are objects only. But in terms of Spring, they are called as Spring beans. Okay. Now, how to retrieve the bean that is created? So for that, we need to use a method context.getBean. What is context? The IOC container. From the IOC container, I am trying to retrieve the bean. What is the bean name? Already I have told you, if your class is employee, the bean name is lowercase employee. And the return type should be an employee object. But this method returns an object by itself. So you have to downcast it to employee. Okay. And in the next line, I can print the employee object. So employee. Fine. Okay. Now guys, before doing this, so I will comment these two lines. I want to see what are all the objects created by the IOC container. So for that, let us see the method context.getBean definition names. Can you see this? This is a string array. So this will show what are all the beans that is created by the IOC container. Please understand, the moment you give this line, the IOC container will create all the objects that are there. Okay, I will repeat it again. What is application context? Application context is our IOC container. The moment you give this line, what it will do is, it will go through this package. It will go and see the classes that are annotated with that component. Then it will create an object for that class. Okay. Now I have removed these two lines. Like I will just comment it. Okay, I have removed it only. Now here, I am just going to call context in application context type. Okay, no need of creating XML. Instead of XML, we are using add component annotation. Getting it? We are not using XML. Instead of XML, we are working with annotations. Now let me give context.getBean definition names. The return type is a string array. String beans. What are all the Java objects that is created by the IOC container? I am trying to retrieve it. For string bean. So bean. Guys, if you are having any questions, you can ask me. I will explain it. Now let me run this. The moment I run it, you can see in the output, the IOC container. See, I have not even called the bean. The IOC container first line itself, it is going into this package. It is creating an employee object. Together with that, it has created objects for all these classes. So technically, the class name is internal I capital configuration annotation config. Then internal auto wired annotation config. internal event listener processor. All these are created by the IOC container. Together with that, it has created our employee class also, employee object also. I'll comment this line at component. I have commented it. Let me rerun the application. You run it as a Java application only. Now see, it is not even creating an object for the class. So the Spring framework, if you want Spring to create an object for your class, the class should be annotated with at component. First step. Next, here I now, okay, now the Spring framework has created an employee object. How to get the employee object from the framework? For that, the method is context.getBean. So you can give the class name, you can give the bean name. There are many ways. Now let us start with by passing the bean name, employee. The return type is an employee object itself. Employee is equal to employee context.getBean. And now I want to print the employee object directly. Okay, what about the employee object? It is having name, employee ID, and department. Did we give any values for it? No, we have not assigned any values for it. So for assigning values, we need to use at value annotation. My dear guys, as I told you, we are understanding the concept. In real-time scenarios, the at value annotation will be used if you are working with data source. If you are working with security, they will expect data from us. So that time we need to give data source means URL, username, password. Those things we have to give. But now, as of now, we will hard code the value. What does this getBean do? It will retrieve the data. This getBean, it is going context.getBean means what? Context is the IOC container. It is like a bag. What it is having? It's having all the Java objects that is created. From the context, I am getting the bean which is having employee. You are going to put what, right? So it means that we are going there. You are saying that my name is Sripriya. So based on that, it has to return me the slip with the name Sripriya. That is the meaning. Getting it? I hope you can understand. You are going to a library. You want to get your ID card. So you are telling your name is Sripriya. So it will give you the ID card. Similarly, I am going and telling I want a bean with the name employee. You automatically it has to give the bean. Now let me run this. See the output, all the values are null because we have not returned the value at all. Yeah, I will repeat it again. The first time when you are running this application, my dear guys, you don't have to even run it as a Spring application. You can run it as a normal Java project. The first step is we are creating the IOC container. What is IOC container? Inversion of control container, which is responsible for creating the Java objects in your application. Spring is not going to do big things and all. First step is it will help you create the objects. If you are connecting to the database, it will help you to connect to the database. Whatever chains are there, whatever links are there, it will help you to do that. It is not going to write any logic for you. You have to write the logic. So in the first line, what is the sequence? We are creating the IOC container. The IOC container will go through the package and it will create the objects that are all available inside this package. How does it know that it has to create an object for employee? You have annotated the employee class with odd component. So automatically it will create an object of employee. That is the meaning. Okay. Now I am just seeing what are all the beans created by the IOC container. That's all. That's we have seen. Now IOC container has created an object. Now what I want to get that object. How to get the object from the IOC container? The method is very simple. Context.getBean. I have to give the bean name. There are so many beans available. I need to say what bean I want. I want the employee bean. So it has to return me the employee bean. This will return an object. So I am downcasting into employee. Now let me save this and run it. Okay. We have got null and all, right? So now what I have to do is let me go to the employee class. Above the setter method, add at value annotation to provide values. Okay. To provide a default value. You can give the value using properties file also. But as of now, to start with, we will give it here directly. At value. Now similarly, above the setter method, let us add the annotation at value, assign 10. You might be wondering why I am giving 10 within double quotes. Though I am giving it in double quotes, Spring framework will automatically do the conversion. It will convert it into a int value. And the third one is set department. Not above the getter method, it is above the setter method. Above, because we are using setter-based dependency injection. At value, within quotes, department admin. Okay, clear? Any questions? Okay. Now next is, let me save this and let me run it. Now see, you can see the output. Employee name, employee ID, department is admin. Fine. Now, what if I want to, this is done. Now let me create one more class. Class address. In the address class also, let me add two instance variables. String city, string state. Now, let me create getter setter methods as usual. Generate, and let me generate toString also. The purpose of generating toString is if you are printing the object, you print it directly. That's the idea. Okay. Now, go to demo setter. I will use this line. Run it. Is it creating an address object? No, not at all. Why? Because you have not added at component annotation. So add at component annotation here. At component. Okay, now let me just run it. So it's creating an address object and also an employee object. So if you want an object to be created in Java, what did you learn? If you use new keyword, automatically an object will be created. In case of Spring, if you annotate the class with that component, an object for that particular class will be created. Okay. Now, coming back to this employee class. Okay. Here also let us add at value annotation, within which let me pass Bangalore and set state at value annotation. Okay. Now, but whenever you are trying to print employee, we are having only employee. I cannot print address. Why? Because employee and address doesn't have any connection. Now let us give a connection. If a class has another class's instance variable, now employee depends on address. Depends on address. Correct? Okay. So for this address also, first let us add getter setter methods. Go to source, generate getter and setters. Select address, click generate. Now this is done. How to inject address into employee? Guys, if I am doing it all by myself, I will create the employee object and I will call set address method. But now I want the IOC container to do it. So what should I do? Above the address instance variable. Okay. Now I am having set address method. We are using setter-based dependency injection. Now we have to inject it. For that, the annotation is at auto wired. If you are adding at auto wired above the setter method, Spring framework will understand, okay, fine, I need to inject address into employee. Is it clear? Employee depends on address. So auto wired means automatically add address into employee or automatically wire address into employee. That is the meaning. Okay. Now in employee class, we need to add toString also together with the address. I have also added address. Okay. Now let me save this. Okay. Now let us run this. I hope it is clear. If a class is having another class's dependency, address will be injected automatically. In this case, we are using setter-based dependency injection. It means it is saying first the IOC container has to create the employee object. But when it is trying to create the employee object, it is saying employee depends on address. And it is using setter method only. So first it will create the employee object. It will create the address object. Then it will call the setter method. I will repeat. It will call the setter method of address and inject address into employee. So what is the first step? Actually, it is creating employee is equal to new employee. Yeah, address is equal to new address. Then employee dot set address of the address object. So these are the three steps that it is doing. Okay. Now let me save this. Now let me run it. Now see the output. Employee name, employee ID, department. Together with that, we are also having the address object. Suppose now in my employee class, if I have not added at auto void at all, it means what? Employee depends on address, but I am not injecting it at all. So the IOC container will not add the address object at all. See the output, the address object will be null. Because you have not added at auto void. So what is the meaning of at auto void? At auto void means inject the dependency that is needed for this employee class. And guys, there is also one more thing that you need to know. When I have added at auto void above the address instance variable. Now I am going to the address class. Above the address class, I forgot to add at component. So what will happen? When you are running demo setter, the IOC container will enter into this package, com.Shristi. Dot setter we are having, it will enter into the sub package. At component, so it will create the employee object. What about address? You have not added at component. It will not create the address object. Next step. You have added at auto void. You are trying to inject address into employee. Do we have address object? No. So when it is trying to inject, it is expecting one bean of address which is not available. So the application itself will not run. It will throw an exception. Unsatisfied dependency injection exception. See here, let me maximize the console. See here, not even the first line it is running. See that. The moment you create the IOC container in the first line, new annotation config application context, even in the first line itself, it is trying to create employee and then it is saying at auto void. So it is checking for address object. Address object is not created at all. So it will throw the exception. Only if the flow is complete, it will work. Suppose say I want to go from my place, from Bangalore, I want to go to Delhi. So I am going from, A to B, B to C, C to D, 4 different points. So all the iteration and the point should be properly planned. Only then I can travel. If there is some discrepancies in between, if the dependency is not available, now I am able to go to A to B, B to C and C to D is not available, means I cannot travel at all. Similar to that, if there is any breakage in between, the application itself will not start. In Java, it is not like that. It will print everything. Only when an exception occurs, it will print it. But in this case, you notice first line itself it is throwing an exception. No, see here. Unsatisfied dependency exception. What is the real exception? No such bean definition exception. No qualifying bean of type address available. I am expecting at least one bean for auto wiring, but you don't have a bean for address. So I am throwing this exception. That's the meaning. So what you have to do? Explicitly, you need to add component annotation. This is a very important point. Many people, they will write all the code perfectly, but they forget to add component. The application itself will not work. So this is called a setter-based dependency injection. I hope it is clear, right? Any questions? Is this clear? Okay. Now, yes. Now, one last thing. We will also see what is constructor-based dependency injection. We have seen setter-based dependency injection. Similarly, constructor-based dependency injection. So for that, let me create a new class. Class name, let me give it a student. In the student class, let me add just one instance variable student's name. Private string name. Again, as usual, let me go and add getter setters. And click generate. Okay, you can use, okay, very good question. So why, so let me just hide this. So can I use at auto void above the field? Yes, you can add at auto void above the field also. That is also fine. So based on your requirement, this is called as field-based dependency injection. We use that also, but usually people prefer to add it above the setter method. Got it? That is mine. Get address above the setter method. Okay, now we are going to see constructor-based dependency injection. I have added getter setter methods. Okay, similarly, let me create another class course. Private string course name. Let me add getter setter methods fast. Generate and go to source, generate to string. And this class also should be annotated with at component annotation. And above the setter method, add at value. Guys, remember you cannot inject string or int value. You can inject only classes, objects. Now, in the student class, let me add auto-where means injecting, calling the setter method or constructor. Now, in the student class, let me add private course. Okay. And this time, guys, see here, I am not going to add getter setter methods. I am going in for a parameterized constructor. Constructor using fields without name, just with course. Click generate. If you give it in this manner, the IOC container understands that student depends on course. Course is a class by itself. This is called as constructor-based dependency injection. Okay, constructor-based dependency injection. What is the purpose of at auto-wiring? If I want to inject one object into another object, the annotation is at auto-wire. So Spring framework will understand. If you have added it above the setter method, it will call it will call the setter method to inject the value. If you have added at auto-wire above the constructor, it will, while creating the student object itself, it will inject the course object. Okay, but guys, from 1.6, you don't have to use at auto-wide above the constructor. This itself is enough. Now let me go to demo setter. I have given com.Shristi only. Now I want to print the student object. Oh, student name I have not given. Above the setter method, let me add at value annotation. Okay. Now go to them. So here, let me try to get the student object. Student is equal to, instead of you writing new student, you are going to call context.getBean of the object name student. And if you want to specify what is the type explicitly, you can give that also. Student.class. Okay, so in this case, you see, you don't have to downcast. If you are giving the bean name, you need to downcast. If you are giving what type of class it is, you don't have to downcast. The next line, print the student object. Okay, now let me save this and run it. See the first step, it has created address object, course object, employee object. And what about student? It is giving me no such bean definition. No bean named student available. Now let us go to the student class. In the student class, I forgot to add what? Add component. Can you see what are all the beans that is created by the IOC container? The IOC container has created address object, course object, employee, because all the three were annotated with add component annotation. I missed to add at student add component for student class. So it has not created an object for student. That's why it's giving the exception in this particular line, line number 20. I'm trying to get the bean with the name student. There is no bean with the name student. That's why it's giving this error. Go to the student class, annotate it with that component. Okay, now let me run this. So now you can see address, course, employee, student. And guys, see here it is giving some hash code value. Why? In the student class, we did not add toString. Go to source, generate toString. Click generate. Save all and rerun it. Now see the application. Name is Sri, course name is Spring. So these are the two types of dependency injection. One is setter-based dependency injection. In case of setter-based dependency injection, add at auto-void annotation above the setter method. Guys, you cannot use it for string or integer or any type. If it is a class by itself, just like address or course, you can add it above the setter method. In case of constructor-based dependency injection, you don't have to use at auto-void annotation. It is enough that you create the constructor by passing the dependency. In this case, while creating the student object itself, it is trying to pass the course object. The real meaning is something like this. New student of new course. That is the meaning. Okay. In case of employee, when you add at auto-void, what exactly is the meaning? First, it is creating an employee object. EMP is equal to new employee. Then It is calling emp dot set address of by passing the address object. Actually, it has created address class also. So after doing that, it is doing this equal to new address. Then it is calling emp dot set address. If you are doing it in Java, you should write this. In case of Spring, you don't have to do it. Automatically, it is taken care. Same thing in this scenario also. If you are doing it in Java, explicitly while creating the student, you have to pass the course object. Because you are working with Spring, Spring framework is responsible for creating the objects for your application. Clear? Okay. So okay, so this is the setup-based dependency. Okay, you want to see which class? Employee class. Now I am just winding up the session. The session is 8 to 9. The session is 8 to 9 every Thursday. Okay, I hope it is clear. Shall we wind up the session now? Any questions?